It was upon a dreary, late autumn morning, the kind that drapes London in a perpetual watercolour of grey and sepia, that I found myself hunched over my desk at 221B, Baker Street. A half-finished manuscript, detailing the baffling affair of the Norwood builder, lay open before me, its ink barely dry. My thoughts, however, were not entirely upon the intricate web of circumstantial evidence that had ensnared young John Hector Macfarlane, but rather upon the figure across the room. There sat my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, not engaged with the customary paraphernalia of his profession, the magnifying glass, the chemical apparatus, the tobacco in his Persian slipper, but staring out of the window with an almost aggressive ennui. The London fog, thick and yellow, seemed to press against the glass, matching the gloom that, I could discern, had settled upon his restless spirit. Weeks had passed since his last truly stimulating case, and the lack of worthy intellectual exercise had begun to manifest in those familiar signs, the twitching fingers, the rapid changes in posture, the occasional sigh that seemed to carry the weight of a world awaiting its detective. "Watson," he began suddenly, without turning, "do you find this pervasive mediocrity as tiresome as I do?" I put down my pen, a familiar smile playing upon my lips. "The weather, Holmes, or mankind in general?" "Both, my dear fellow, both. The criminal intellect of our age seems to have atrophied. It is all vulgar passion and clumsy execution. Where is the artistry? The grand design? One yearns for a problem that stretches the very sinews of one's mind." Just as he concluded this lament, a sharp rap echoed from the door. Mrs. Hudson, with her usual punctuality, brought in the Morning Post. Among the usual bills and circulars, a single, thick envelope stood out, adorned with foreign stamps and an official-looking wax seal. Holmes, whose gaze had followed her every movement with an almost predatory interest, plucked it from the tray. "Ah," he murmured, his long fingers already tearing at the seal. "A Spanish postmark, and of some considerable vintage by the look of it. An official missive, undoubtedly. Perhaps a bullfight gone awry, or the theft of a particularly flamboyant fan." He unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the closely written lines. As he read, a subtle transformation occurred. The lassitude melted from his frame, replaced by that keen alertness that always heralded the hunt. A spark, almost imperceptible to any but myself, ignited in his grey eyes. "Extraordinary," he breathed, more to himself than to me. "Truly extraordinary. What is it, Holmes?" I inquired, leaning forward, my own pulse quickening with the prospect of a new adventure. "An invitation, Watson, from the sun-drenched shores of Spain. From one Inspector Miguel Rodriguez of the Policia Nacional, stationed in a rather charming-sounding coastal town called Cadax, near Barcelona." He paused, a slight frown creasing his brow. "It appears, my dear Watson, that Inspector Rodriguez has stumbled upon a mystery so profound, so utterly devoid of conventional explanation, that he has seen fit to appeal to the talents of a consulting detective from faraway London." "And the nature of this mystery?" I pressed, already envisioning quaint Spanish villages and sun-baked landscapes, a pleasant departure from the perpetual fog. Holmes leaned back, a faint, almost sardonic smile touching his lips. "The disappearance, Watson, of 2 children. Twin children aged precisely 3 years. Isabella and Mateo Valdez, from their family's opulent estate. No forced entry, no ransom demand, no struggle, no witnesses. They vanished," Inspector Rodriguez reports, as if spirited away by the very sea breezes that caress the Catalan coast. "But surely," I began, "such a case falls within the purview of the local authorities. What could possibly necessitate your involvement?" "Precisely my thought, Watson, and precisely why it piques my interest so profoundly." Rodriguez admits his utter bewilderment. He has exhausted every conventional avenue. And this, my friend, is where the case leaves the well-trodden path of criminality and steps into the shadows of the truly unique. No ordinary kidnapper would leave such a pristine scene, nor forsake the opportunity for recompense. This is not the work of common ruffians. He rose from his chair, pacing the worn Persian rug with renewed vigor. "A grand design, you see, but one of a nature that utterly defies our understanding without further examination. A delicate and complex tapestry, woven not merely from deceit, but from something far more subtle. Spain then, Holmes. Spain, indeed, Watson. Prepare your notes, pack your warmest coat, for even the Mediterranean can be fickle at this time of year. We shall arrange passage immediately. The call of an unraveling enigma, especially one cloaked in such sun-kissed strangeness, is a siren song I find utterly impossible to resist. He cast a glance at the map of Europe pinned to the wall, his finger tracing a line from London to the Iberian Peninsula. A delightful change of pace, would you not agree? And a chance to observe how the Spanish mind applies itself to the mechanics of mischief. The chill dampness of London was soon exchanged for the brisker, salt-laced air of the English Channel as we secured our berths aboard a fine steamer bound for Barcelona. Holmes, with his customary efficiency, had seen to the arrangements with a speed that left me breathless, considering the general lethargy that had afflicted him but hours before. Such was the galvanizing effect of a truly baffling problem. Our vessel, the Alicante Star, was a sturdy merchantman with a comfortable passenger complement, a mixture of businessmen, a few tourists brave enough to face the autumn seas, and, to Holmes's evident amusement, a rather theatrical-looking troupe en route to a European tour. I, for my part, found a certain comfort in the rhythmic thrum of the engines and the vast, open expanse of the grey sea, a welcome balm after the incessant demands of city life. Holmes, however, rarely sought comfort in idleness. Scarcely had the white cliffs of Dover receded from view than he had commenced his meticulous survey of our temporary society. We stood on the promenade deck, a brisk wind whipping at our coats, as he offered a running commentary, delivered in a low, almost conspiratorial tone, that always managed to both enlighten and exasperate me. "Observe, Watson, that gentleman yonder," he began, nodding subtly towards a portly man with a florid face, engrossed in a financial newspaper. Note the meticulous folding of his paper, the way his thumb traces the columns of figures, the slight but consistent tremor in his left hand when he raises his coffee cup. A merchant, undoubtedly. And a successful one, judging by the quality of his tailor. But the tremor, Watson, and the dark circles beneath his eyes, gambling, perhaps. Or a recent, significant loss in a speculative venture that keeps him from his sleep. He then turned his attention to a solitary woman sketching the receding coastline. And the lady with the easel, he continued. Her hands, though stained with paint, are finely shaped, accustomed to delicate work. Her smock, however, has seen better days, and the canvas she works upon is of rather inexpensive quality. An artist, certainly, but one struggling against the tide of public indifference. Perhaps fleeing a disappointment of the heart as much as seeking inspiration. And so it went, each passenger reduced to a series of observable facts and logical deductions, until the entire ship seemed to become a living diorama for Holmes's penetrating intellect. Our discussions naturally drifted back to the Kodak's case. As the ship ploughed through the Bay of Biscay, Holmes leaned against the rail, his profile sharp against the churning sea. The inspector's account, Watson, he mused, is most instructive in what it does not say. No note. No demand. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. This is not the brutal efficiency of a criminal syndicate, nor the desperate act of a financially motivated kidnapper. Such individuals leave traces, however faint. They desire a tangible outcome of money, power, vengeance. But here, nothing. A void. Then what remains? I asked, pulling my scarf tighter against the rising wind. A motive, my dear Watson, of a far more intricate and, dare I say, human dimension. One rooted not in avarice or malice, but perhaps in some profound psychological disturbance. The children were precisely 3 years old. A curious detail to emphasize. Is it an age significant to the perpetrator? A lost memory, perhaps, or a longing. He paused, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, as if seeking an answer amongst the waves. This eliminates the casual thief, the opportunistic predator. We are looking for someone with a deeply personal connection, however indirect, to the Valdez family or, more likely, to the concept of those children themselves. Our voyage was not entirely devoid of incident, though of a trivial nature compared to the impending mystery. One afternoon, a rather agitated elderly gentleman burst into the dining salon, loudly proclaiming the theft of his prized pocket watch. The ship's purser, a harried individual, began to question the staff. Holmes, however, merely observed the gentleman's dishevelled state, the peculiar knot in his necktie, and the faint scent of cigar smoke clinging to his waistcoat, despite his protestations that he had not smoked in years. "Begging your pardon, sir," Holmes interrupted smoothly, "but I believe you will find your timepiece not stolen, but merely misplaced. Perhaps you were reading in the smoking lounge earlier, and in your haste to return to your cabin, you left it inadvertently in the pocket of your smoking jacket, which you then changed out of without realizing." The gentleman, after a moment of sputtering indignation, sheepishly admitted to having done precisely that. A red-faced steward was dispatched to his cabin and returned moments later with the gleaming watch. The purser looked on with a mixture of relief and astonishment, while Holmes merely offered a slight, knowing smile. It was a minor incident, a mere trifle, yet it served as a neat demonstration of the faculties that would soon be brought to bear on the more profound enigma awaiting us across the sea. As the Alicante Star finally steamed into the bustling harbour of Barcelona, the air growing warmer, scented with unfamiliar spices and the promise of new adventures, I felt a tremor of anticipation. The drabness of London was far behind us. Before us lay the vibrant, sun-drenched landscapes of Spain, and with it, a mystery that, as Holmes had so aptly put it, promised to stretch the very sinews of his extraordinary mind. The transition from the bustling, cosmopolitan energy of Barcelona to the serene, almost untouched beauty of Cadaqués was like stepping from one world into another. We disembarked from the train at Figueres, exchanging the clatter of rails for the purr of a hired automobile, which then wended its way along a winding coastal road. The landscape transformed with every curve, ancient olive groves clinging to sun-baked hillsides, dramatic cliffs plunging into the cerulean Mediterranean, and then, nestled in a secluded bay, the whitewashed houses of Cadaqués, gleaming like scattered pearls against the rugged backdrop of the Cap de Creus Peninsula. The air, crisp and clean, carried the faint, invigorating scent of pine and salt. Inspector Miguel Rodriguez, a man whose dark, piercing eyes and neatly trimmed moustache spoke of both intelligence and quiet authority, met us at the village's small quay. He was younger than I had perhaps imagined from his official correspondence, yet his brow was etched with a weariness that belied his years. As he greeted Holmes and myself, his hand clasp was firm, his relief palpable. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his English accented but clear, "it is truly an honor. And a great burden lifted, to see you here." Holmes, ever direct, wasted no time on pleasantries. "Inspector, the facts, if you please, as they stand now. Has anything, however trivial, come to light since your letter?" Rodriguez sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "Nothing, Mr. Holmes. Absolutely nothing. It is as if the earth opened and swallowed them whole. The Valdez family is distraught. The community, bewildered. And I confess, am utterly at my wit's end." We walked along the narrow, cobbled streets, past fishermen mending their nets and locals gathered in shaded plazas, their hushed conversations hinting at the unease that pervaded the village. Rodriguez led us to a small, unassuming cafe overlooking the bay, where a strong, dark coffee was placed before us. "The children," Rodriguez began, his voice low, "Isabella and Mateo. 3 years old. Twins. They vanished 2 weeks ago, on the night of the Fiesta de Sant Pere. The Valdez estate, as you know, is one of the largest here, just beyond the village limits. The family was hosting a large gathering, relatives, friends, local dignitaries. Many people, much festivity." He explained the sequence of events. The children were put to bed in their nursery, on the ground floor of the villa, shortly after sunset. Their nanny, a young woman named Sophia, checked on them around 9 o'clock. both asleep. The door to the nursery was locked from the outside, as was customary for the children's safety, and the window latched. Sophia then rejoined the festivities. Around midnight, Senora Valdez, wanting to check on her little ones, went to the nursery. The door was still locked. But when she opened it, they were gone. And the window? Holmes interjected, his eyes fixed intently on Rodriguez. Still latched, apparently, from the inside. Though later inspection showed no signs of forced entry. The entire estate was searched immediately. Every room, every garden path, the nearby shoreline. Nothing. Not a footprint, not a discarded toy, not a single clue. No ransom demand, you said. None. We have monitored all communications. Nothing. And the Valdez family itself? Any enemies? Business rivals? Disgruntled former employees? Rodriguez shook his head. They are well respected, Mr. Holmes. Old family, considerable wealth but not ostentatious. Senor Valdez runs a successful fishing fleet and exports olive oil. No known feuds. The staff have all been with them for years, fiercely loyal. Tell me about the children, Inspector, Holmes requested, leaning forward, his gaze unusually soft for a moment. Their personalities? Their habits? Were they known to wander? Were they boisterous, or quiet? Quiet, I believe. Sweet-natured. Very attached to each other, as twins often are. Sophia said they were rarely apart. They enjoyed playing in the garden, and Mateo, in particular, was fond of the little wooden bird he carried everywhere. Holmes's fingers tapped a light rhythm on the table. An interesting detail. A wooden bird. His eyes then scanned the quaint street outside. Tell me, Inspector, what do the local people say? These coastal communities often possess a certain oral history, do they not? Superstitions? Whispers of the past. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. There are always old tales, Mr. Holmes. Of the sea, of spirits, of the Tramontana wind driving people mad. But nothing concrete. The people are frightened. They speak of witches, of the devil, but these are merely expressions of their fear and bewilderment. Indeed, Holmes murmured, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Fear is a powerful stimulant to the imagination. But sometimes, Inspector, the wildest tales contain the most surprising kernels of truth. Lead us to the Valdez estate. I believe it is time to examine the scene where this most peculiar vanishing act was staged. The Valdez villa stood a short distance from the village, nestled amidst a terraced garden that sloped gently towards the sea. It was a handsome dwelling, built in the traditional Catalan style with thick stone walls and terracotta roof tiles, yet it exuded an air of quiet opulence. Today, however, that opulence was overshadowed by an almost oppressive silence, a palpable weight of grief and confusion. The vibrant bougainvillea climbing its walls seemed muted, and the normally cheerful chirping of cicadas was conspicuously absent. We were received by Senor Carlos and Senora Elena Valdez, a couple whose distress was painfully evident. Senora Elena, a woman of refined features, had a haunted look in her eyes, while Senor Carlos, though attempting a facade of stoicism, clenched and unclenched his fists involuntarily. Inspector Rodriguez introduced us, and Holmes, with a rare display of quiet sympathy, offered his condolences before swiftly, but gently, guiding the conversation to the night of the disappearance. Please, tell us everything you can recall from that evening, Holmes requested, his voice soft but unwavering. Senora Elena recounted the fiesta, a celebration of their family's patron saint, filled with music, laughter, and the joyous chatter of many guests. The children, she said, her voice catching, Isabella and Mateo, they loved the excitement. but they were put to bed early. Sophia, their nanny, made sure of it. The nursery is on the ground floor, for convenience, and because it is the coolest room in summer. And the last time you saw them? I kissed them goodnight just before Sophia put them down, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. They were so beautiful, so innocent. Senor Carlos took over. The party continued. I saw Sophia rejoining the guests. The music was loud. Many people were coming and going from the house to the garden. No one noticed anything amiss until Elena went to check on them around midnight. She found their room empty. And the nursery itself. Holmes interjected. May we examine it? The Valdez led us to the room. It was a cheerful space, despite its current emptiness, decorated with soft colors and childish drawings pinned to the walls. Two small, neatly made beds stood side by side, their pristine sheets undisturbed. Toys were neatly arranged on shelves, and a rocking horse stood sentinel in a corner. The overall impression was one of tidiness, almost too perfect for a room recently vacated by two boisterous 3-year-olds. Holmes moved with a quiet intensity, his eye sweeping over every detail, missing nothing. He knelt by the window, examining the latch. You said it was found latched from the inside, he asked Rodriguez, who nodded. Holmes touched the latch with the tip of his finger, then gently tested the window itself. It appears secure now, he murmured, but observe, Watson, the faint scoring on the painted frame here, just below the latch. It suggests that a slight pressure, perhaps from something thin and flexible, was once applied, causing the latch to slip slightly, yet re-engage with a minimal disturbance. Not a forceful manipulation, but a subtle one. He then carefully brushed his fingers along the window sill, bringing them to his nose. And this scent, curious. I leaned closer. It was a faint, almost ethereal aroma, like dried lavender mixed with something older, like old paper or dried herbs. It certainly wasn't the scent of the sea or fresh flowers from the garden. Holmes then turned his attention to the small wooden toy I remembered Inspector Rodriguez mentioning. It lay on a bedside table, a crudely carved but clearly beloved wooden bird, its surface worn smooth from countless small hands. This, I presume, belonged to Matteo? Holmes inquired, picking it up. Yes, Senora Elena confirmed softly. He never went anywhere without it. Holmes examined the bird, turning it over in his hand, a thoughtful expression on his face. He then placed it carefully back on the table. He spent several minutes simply observing the room, his gaze lingering on the walls, the floorboards, even the ceiling. Next, we interviewed Sophia, the nanny. She was a young woman, plainly terrified and guilt-ridden. She reiterated her account of putting the children to bed, locking the door, and checking the window. She swore she had heard nothing, seen nothing unusual. The music was so loud, Senor, she explained, wringing her hands. And everyone was talking. Holmes pressed her on the children's habits. Were they sound sleepers? Did they ever wake during the night? Did they ever express any fear of being alone? Sophia confirmed they were generally good sleepers, but Matteo occasionally woke with nightmares. But they never left their room by themselves, she insisted. They knew not to. As we left the nursery, Holmes paused in the grand hallway. His gaze fell upon a large, ornate frame hanging on the wall. Inside was a faded, sepia-tone drawing. It depicted two small children, twins, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their faces strikingly similar to Isabella and Matteo. A family portrait? Holmes asked, his voice carefully neutral. Senor Carlos nodded. Our ancestors. From the late 19th century. Twin cousins, long gone. Holmes studied it for a long moment, then nodded slowly, a peculiar glint in his eye. Indeed. A remarkable resemblance. He said no more, but I saw the wheels of his extraordinary mind beginning to turn, connecting disparate fragments of information, drawing lines between the seemingly unconnected. The pristine nursery, the peculiar scent, the subtly disturbed latch, the beloved wooden bird, and now, the haunting image of twins from another era. The pieces were beginning to align, though into a pattern I could not yet discern. The afternoon sun, now past its zenith, cast long shadows across the terraced gardens of the Valdez estate as Holmes and I concluded our initial survey. While I continued to wrestle with the conventional explanations, an undetected intruder, a disgruntled servant, a calculated abduction, Holmes had already, with characteristic swiftness, discarded them as inadequate. "Consider, Watson," he began as we walked down a cypress-lined path, the scent of rosemary thick in the air, the sheer illogicality of a professional kidnapping in these circumstances. No communication. No demands. The children spirited away without a whisper from a house teeming with guests. A kidnapper wants something concrete, money, leverage. The risks are enormous, the rewards must be equally tangible. Here, there are none. But then, what motive could there be? I countered, still clinging to the framework of criminal intent. Love? Revenge? Perhaps, but even these typically leave a different kind of footprint. Revenge, in particular, often seeks an audience, a public humiliation. And love, if it were to prompt such an act, would be of a most peculiar and dangerous variety. No, Watson, the absence of conventional traces points us towards a highly unconventional perpetrator, driven by a motive that transcends the rational. Our next objective was to immerse ourselves in the village of Codax itself. Holmes believed that understanding the local fabric, its legends, its unspoken truths, could often illuminate the darkest corners of a crime. Inspector Rodriguez, though still visibly perplexed by Holmes's seemingly abstract line of inquiry, dutifully accompanied us. We strolled through the labyrinthine streets, their cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Fishermen mended nets by the harbor, their faces weathered by sun and sea. Old women, dressed in black, sat on stoops, their eyes missing nothing. Holmes, seemingly casual, observed everything, the patterns of trade, the subtle hierarchies, the way people greeted each other, the small deviations from the norm. It was then that I first noticed her. An elderly woman, her hair a wild, silver mane, walked slowly along the seawall, her threadbare dress swaying in the breeze. She spoke softly to herself, her gestures expansive and theatrical, as if conversing with invisible companions. In her hand, clutched tightly, was a small, crudely carved wooden bird, strikingly similar to Mateo Valdez's cherished toy. "Who is that woman, Inspector?" I whispered to Rodriguez, subtly indicating her. Rodriguez followed my gaze, a flicker of sadness passing across his features. "Ah, Dona Emilia. The villagers call her Amada Luna. She lives alone, just outside the village. A harmless soul, for the most part, but quite touched." "Touched by what, Inspector?" Holmes asked, his voice sharp, his eyes never leaving the woman. "By sorrow, Mr. Holmes. A great sorrow, many years ago. She was an artist, quite a talent in her youth, I am told. But then her own twin children, also 3 years old, disappeared. Some say they drowned in a sudden storm, others that they were taken by the sea. She never recovered. Her mind retreated into itself. She often walks about, looking for them, or talking to them. A tragic case." Holmes's gaze intensified, a predatory gleam entering his eyes. He watched as Amada Luna paused, knelt by a patch of wildflowers, and carefully arranged some pebbles around them, murmuring indistinctly. The wooden bird never left her hand. "That wooden bird, Inspector," Holmes pressed, Has she always carried it? For as long as anyone can remember, Rodriguez confirmed. It was carved by her husband, for her children, before their disappearance. A sentimental piece. A sudden, almost imperceptible tremor ran through Holmes's frame. He turned to me, his eyes alight with a profound understanding. The scent, Watson. Do you recall the faint aroma in the nursery? That curious blend of dried lavender and old parchment. I nodded, the memory now startlingly vivid. I observed the same scent, far stronger, near Dona Emilia's cottage this morning when we drove past. I dismissed it then as incidental. But now... He paused, his gaze sweeping from the elderly woman to the Valdez estate in the distance. The age of the children. The twins. The wooden bird. The psychological trauma. It is beginning to form a pattern, Watson, a terrifyingly clear one. Rodriguez looked from Holmes to Dona Emilia, then back again, a dawning horror on his face. You cannot mean, Mr. Holmes, she is a frail, confused old woman. Indeed, Inspector. But frailty does not preclude profound delusion. Her mind, warped by an unspeakable grief, has created its own reality. Her own children vanished at the tender age of 3. And now, 2 other 3-year-old twins disappear from the very village where her tragedy unfolded. Do you not see the terrible symmetry? Holmes's voice dropped to a near whisper, though his intensity was undiminished. She did not kidnap them, Inspector, in the criminal sense of the word. She reclaimed them. In her fractured mind, these children are not the Valdez twins, they are her children, miraculously returned to her, precisely as she remembers them. The Valdez nursery, a familiar space within her delusion, became simply the place where her lost babies had been waiting for her to find them. Rodriguez's face went ashen. The outlandish notion, when presented with Holmes's irrefutable logic, suddenly made a chilling and undeniable sense. The unlatched window, the undisturbed room, the lack of struggle, all ceased to be inexplicable anomalies and became instead grim testament to a mother's profound, yet tragically misguided, love. The silent village whispers, the harmless eccentric, the tragic past, all coalesced into a single, heartbreaking truth. Her cottage, Inspector, Holmes declared, turning with purpose. Lead the way. I have a strong suspicion we will find the Valdez children not in a hidden lair of criminals, but in a small, isolated home, cared for by a woman who believes them to be her own. The path to Dona Emilia's cottage was not well trodden. It wound its way up a steep, rocky incline overlooking the sea, a testament to her chosen isolation. The air grew thinner, carrying the sharp scent of wild herbs and the ceaseless murmur of the waves crashing against the rocks below. Inspector Rodriguez, his initial disbelief giving way to a grim conviction, led the way, his pace quickened by a desperate hope. I followed, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. The thought of confronting such profound, delusional grief, especially with the lives of 2 innocent children at stake, filled me with a trepidation I rarely experienced in the face of conventional villainy. The cottage itself was small, built of rough-hewn stone, its windows few and small, like eyes squinting against the harsh sun. A tangle of neglected vines clung to its walls, and a few faded ceramic pots held desiccated plants. It had the air of a place where time had stalled, where the outside world had long ceased to intrude. Rodriguez knocked gently on the weathered wooden door. There was no immediate answer. He knocked again, a little louder. A faint, childish giggle, followed by a soft, melodic hum, drifted from within. Rodriguez exchanged a look with Holmes, his face a mixture of relief and profound sorrow. Holmes, with a deferential nod to the inspector, took the initiative. He pushed the door, which yielded with a soft groan, revealing an interior steeped in a dim, dusty light. The air inside was thick with the scent I had detected earlier, dried lavender, aged paper, and something else, something cloyingly sweet, like old potpourri. The main room was a chaotic testament to a life lived deeply in the past. Canvases, some finished, others half completed, leaned against every wall, depicting vibrant, almost ethereal landscapes of Kodaks, often featuring children playing by the sea. Sketchbooks lay open on a rickety table, alongside a collection of worn wooden toys, small shells, and dried flowers. It was a museum of a mind trapped in a moment of unbearable loss. And there, in the center of it all, were the children. Isabella and Mateo Valdez. They sat on a threadbare rug, playing quietly with a collection of wooden blocks and seashells. Dona Emilia, her silver hair catching the slivers of light from the small window, was seated on a low stool beside them, humming a lullaby. Her face, though deeply lined, held an expression of serene contentment, a profound, almost beatific joy I had not seen on her wandering face in the village. Her eyes, often vacant or distant when seen from afar, were now alight with a gentle, focused warmth. She looked up as we entered, her gaze innocent, untroubled. "Oh," she said softly, a small, polite smile gracing her lips. "Visitors. Do come in. My children were just telling me a story about a little fish they saw in the bay." Her children. My heart ached for the Valdez family, for this woman, and for the sheer, tragic misunderstanding of it all. Isabella and Mateo, though perhaps a little bewildered by the unfamiliar surroundings and the quiet intensity of Dona Emilia, seemed unharmed, well-fed, and calm. They looked up at us with wide, curious eyes, but showed no signs of fear or distress. They were simply playing. Holmes stepped forward, his voice a low, soothing murmur, carefully calibrated not to startle. "Good afternoon, Senora. What beautiful children you have." Dona Emilia beamed, stroking Isabella's hair. "Aren't they? My little ones. So much energy. They've been playing so wonderfully since they came home." "It was quite a journey, wasn't it, my dears?" she addressed the twins. "But you're safe now, with Mama." Rodriguez, momentarily speechless, looked at Holmes, a silent plea for guidance in his eyes. This was not a criminal to be apprehended, but a fragile soul clinging to a lifeline of delusion. Holmes knelt down, eye level with the children. "And what are your names, little ones?" he asked, his voice entirely devoid of his usual analytical edge, filled instead with a gentle warmth. "Isabella," the girl replied shyly, pointing to herself. "And Mateo," the boy added, holding up a small, carved wooden bird, the same one Rodriguez had described, a twin to the one Dona Emilia carried. Dona Emilia laughed softly. "They are playing a game, you see. They always like to pretend their names were different. My little Isabella and Mateo." The full tragedy of the situation washed over me. This woman, so lost in her past, had genuinely believed these children were her own, returned from the embrace of memory. She hadn't snatched them, she had merely found what her heart had been searching for decades. The unlatched window had not been an entrance for a thief, but an invitation, a pathway, perceived by her broken mind as the children's return. Holmes rose slowly, his expression grave. He turned to Rodriguez. "Inspector," he said, his voice barely audible, "the case is solved. The children are found. Now begins the far more delicate task. The kidnapping was not a crime of malice or gain, but a profound, almost poetic act of a mind utterly fractured by grief, a desperate attempt to mend the irreparable." Dona Emilia, the quiet, reclusive artist, had become the architect of an illusion so complete, so powerfully real to her, that it had drawn two innocent children into its heart. The Valdez twins were not victims of villainy, but unwilling players in a living, breathing, and profoundly sad memory. Chapter 7. The silence that followed Holmes's declaration in Dona Emilia's cottage was profound, broken only by the gentle murmur of the children at play and the distant cry of a seagull. Inspector Rodriguez stood frozen, grappling with the sheer weight of Holmes's revelation. The concept of a crime without criminal intent, a kidnapping driven by profound delusion rather than malice, was utterly foreign to his police training, yet undeniably compelling in the face of the evidence. Holmes, recognizing the inspector's turmoil, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Inspector, this is not a matter for handcuffs and charges. It is a matter for the greatest delicacy and compassion." He then addressed Dona Emilia, his voice still gentle, but firm with an underlying authority. "Senora, these children, while undoubtedly bringing you great joy, have families who are desperately worried for them. They need to return home." Dona Emilia's serene expression faltered, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "Return home? But they are home, senor. My little ones have only just come back to me." It was a delicate tightrope walk, and Holmes navigated it with the consummate skill of a master diplomat. He explained, in simple, empathetic terms, that sometimes children grew so quickly that they appeared as adults, and then, for a brief, magical time, they might seem to return to their childhood form. He spoke of journeys, of cycles, of the sea giving and taking. It was a narrative crafted not to deceive, but to soothe, to provide a gentle transition for a mind that could not tolerate harsh reality. "Your children, Senora," Holmes continued, "are always with you, in your heart, in your memories. And these two little ones, they have their own journey to complete. They must go back to their own parents now, who love them very much." Rodriguez, now understanding the crucial role he had to play, stepped forward. "Senora Emilia, the village has been very worried. We need to assure their parents that they are safe." He spoke with a quiet authority that, combined with Holmes's gentle persuasion, seemed to penetrate Dona Emilia's fog, if only momentarily. A flicker of distress, a profound sadness, clouded her eyes. She clutched the wooden bird in her hand, her gaze drifting towards the sea. Meanwhile, I quietly checked the children. They were a little pale, perhaps, from the unaccustomed quiet, but physically unharmed and surprisingly resilient. They seemed more curious about the sudden influx of adults than distressed. The most challenging task was the reunion with the Valdez family. We returned to the estate, the twins in tow, a profound sense of relief mingling with the lingering sorrow of the truth. Senora Elena and Senor Carlos rushed forward, their cries of joy echoing through the house. The embrace was tearful, overwhelming, a torrent of relief that threatened to wash away weeks of agony. Once the initial euphoria subsided, Holmes gently, yet comprehensively, explained the full, tragic scope of the situation. He outlined Dona Emilia's history, her long-standing grief, and the profound delusion that had led her to reclaim their children. He emphasized that there was no malice, no criminal intent, only a desperate, heartbroken love that had manifested in the most unforeseen way. "This is not a case for punishment, Senor Valdez," Holmes stated gravely. "It is a case for compassion and care. Dona Emilia is herself a victim of an unbearable sorrow that has consumed her mind." Senor Carlos, his face still streaked with tears of joy for his children, looked from Holmes to Rodriguez, then back to his wife, who held their twins close. The initial shock of the explanation gave way to a deeper understanding, a dawning empathy. "She needs help, Mr. Holmes," Senora Elena said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Professional care. Not a prison." Rodriguez nodded. "We have contacted the specialists in Barcelona. They can provide her with the support she needs, in an environment where she can be safe and cared for. It will be a delicate transition, but a necessary one." Holmes ensured that a plan was immediately put into place. Dona Emilia would be gently persuaded to leave her cottage, with the understanding that her children were embarking on another journey, perhaps to return again when the stars aligned. The village doctor, aware of her history, would assist, along with a compassionate caregiver from the church. The weight lifted from the Valdez family was immense, but so too was the new burden of empathy and understanding that Holmes had placed upon them. They had lost their children for a time, but they had also gained a profound insight into the fragility of the human mind and the devastating power of unaddressed grief. As the sun began to set over Cadax, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the initial crisis had passed. The children were home. But the resolution was not one of triumph over evil, but of a quiet, compassionate understanding of human suffering. The case of the Cadax twins was not a triumph of logic over crime, but a testament to the profound complexities of the human heart and the often blurred lines between sanity and sorrow. Chapter 8. The evening descended upon Cadax with a gentle hush, the last rays of the sun painting the whitewashed village in strokes of gold and rose. Having ensured the Valdez children were safely reunited with their family, and that the delicate process of caring for Dona Emilia was in motion, Holmes, Rodriguez, and I found ourselves at a quiet, seaside tavern. The clinking of glasses and the low murmur of Spanish voices formed a soothing backdrop to our shared reflection. Inspector Rodriguez, visibly lighter now that the immediate crisis had passed, raised his glass. To Mr. Holmes, and to Dr. Watson. You have brought light to our darkest hour, and peace to a community that was gripped by a most peculiar fear. He paused, his gaze thoughtful. I confess, Mr. Holmes, my methods are of the earth. I look for footprints, for motives, for weapons. You, however, look deeper. You looked into the human heart, and into the shadow it can cast. Holmes acknowledged the compliment with a slight inclination of his head. The conventional criminal, Inspector, leaves conventional traces. But the human mind, in its most profound agony, can construct a reality so complete, so self-sustaining, that its actions defy all logical expectations of criminality. It was the absence of a motive, not its presence, that was the most telling clue in this case. He took a slow sip of his local wine, his eye scanning the horizon where the last vestiges of daylight bled into the deep indigo of the Mediterranean. The true mystery, Watson, lay not in who took the children, but why, and in the very nature of that why. Dona Emilia's actions, though they caused immense distress, were born not of malice, but of a profound, delusional love. A mother's heart, broken and mended with phantoms. It was a tragedy of the spirit rather than a crime of intent. I found myself nodding in agreement, a deep sense of melancholy settling upon me. It reminds us, Holmes, that not all darkness is evil. Some of it is simply immense sorrow, manifesting in ways we can barely comprehend. My medical training often led me to physical ailments, but this case, more than many, had laid bare the devastating power of the mind's internal landscape. The lines between sanity and madness, between right and wrong, had never seemed so blurred, nor the need for compassion so urgent. Indeed, Watson, Holmes agreed, his voice softening. The human mind is a far more complex and fertile ground for observation than any criminal underworld. It is a tapestry woven of memory, emotion, and circumstance, often fraying at the edges when subjected to unbearable strain. He mused for a moment, tracing the rim of his glass. To understand such a case, one must discard the black and white of legal statutes and delve into the spectrum of human suffering. A challenging, and often humbling, endeavor. The following morning, under a sky of impossibly brilliant blue, we boarded a small local boat, bound for Barcelona and then the return voyage home. The air was fresh, carrying the tang of the sea and a faint hint of rosemary from the hills. Inspector Rodriguez stood on the quay, waving until we were but a distant speck. He was a good man, a capable officer, but I knew this case would stay with him, a stark reminder that some mysteries required more than just forensic skill. As our vessel cut through the gentle waves, Holmes leaned back, his eyes closed. He was not, I knew, sleeping, but rather digesting the experience, filing away every detail, every observation, every nuance of this most unusual adventure. "You are rather quiet, Holmes," I ventured, after a long silence. He opened his eyes, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I am merely contemplating, Watson, the infinite capacity of the human heart, for both devotion and despair. It is a potent force, capable of constructing elaborate illusions, of defying logic, and of, in its own tragic way, seeking a form of solace. And it teaches us that not every enigma can be solved with pure intellect alone. Sometimes, a touch of empathy is the most potent magnifying glass of all." And so, we left the sun-drenched shores of Cadax, carrying with us not the thrill of a captured villain, but the poignant memory of a mother's fractured love, and the quiet understanding that the deepest mysteries are often those etched not in crime, but in the profound, intricate workings of the human spirit. The London fog, upon our return, would seem less oppressive, having seen the ghosts that haunted the sun.